There's news that doesn't surprise you all that much. For example, Saudi Arabia plans to build the city of the future. Well, who else if not them, right? But the Line is not just a modern city with solar panels and other such devices. It was positioned as a mirror-clad city, as a rethinking of the usual urban design, but most importantly as a linear one. The plan was for around 9 million people to live in an area of just 13 square miles. How? You know, the modern way. The idea of the Line has caught the attention of urban planners and architects from all over the world. And it's no surprise since the project's visualization showed a city longer than the distance between New York and Philadelphia. The project of such a city consists of 2 mirrored buildings with open space between them. And these buildings aren't just long, but also unbelievably tall. They have to be taller than the Empire State Building, 2 elongated skyscrapers in the middle of the desert. Building these structures would make them the 3rd tallest in the country after the Abraj Al Bait Clock Tower and the Jeddah Tower, which is still under construction. The Line skyscrapers would rank about 12th among the tallest buildings in the world. Sounds too ambitious? You bet. Experts call this project one of the biggest and most complex construction projects in history. And this project is literally falling apart right before our eyes, despite all the resources of Saudi Arabia. To figure out why, we first need to dive into the details. And of course, make some coffee. As always, here's a super unobtrusive reminder to those who forget to do something, not to forget to do it at the end of the video or while watching it. And thanks to those who understand my wish to stay anonymous. Actually, the Line in all its planned grandeur was supposed to be just one part of NEOM, a futuristic oasis planned for the Saudi Arabian desert. It's a mega project covering 10,000 square miles that's set to include a floating industrial complex, a global trade hub, tourist resorts, and that very linear city. The Line was initially pitched as the future of accessible urban planning, with amenities within walking distance from homes and areas connected by one of the fastest trains in the world. In the promotional materials, the Line was described in nearly mystical terms like a civilization revolution where AI would provide all the amenities. To be honest, I was already feeling a bit uneasy at this point. Trusting an entire city to AI feels kind of hasty. And it's a huge city. According to the original plan, by 2030, the Line is expected to provide housing for 1.5 million people. And by 2045, forecasts predict that this number will reach 9 million. 9 million! That's unprecedented compared to other cities of similar capacity. See for yourself. 9 million people, that's the population of Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. Mexico City ranks 30th on the list of the most populated cities in the world, but Mexico City looks way bigger. For example, London has a population of about 8.8 million people. New York has 8.3 million. So we have a city here with more people than New York, but it stretches out in a long and very narrow line. This results in an incredible population density. See for yourselves. 106 miles long, 656 feet wide, and 9 million people. That comes out to about 260,000 people per 0.4 square miles. For comparison, in Manila, the most densely populated city in the world, the population density was 44,000 people per 0.4 square miles in 2020. Don't you think the city of the future will feel like a closet crammed full? But not everyone shares that opinion. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, is really excited about it. The prince said that the difference between NEOM and an ordinary city would be as striking as the difference between an old Nokia phone and a stylish smartphone. The internal style catalog of NEOM includes elevators that somehow fly through the sky, an urban spaceport, and buildings shaped like a double helix, outstretched falcon wings, and a blooming flower. Specifically, the Line is less complex than NEOM, but they plan to install desalination plants and use completely renewable energy sources. The important thing is harmony with the environment and zero carbon emissions. Very, very elongated harmony. There are also some quite odd ideas. For example, in NEOM, they're looking into the concept of channels filled with swimmable water, which would create a new commuting option. So instead of commuting to work or school, you could just swim there. And not in a boat, but on your own, to stay more active. In this way, residents can look forward to an additional 10 years of healthy life expectancy. People are expected to live on a car-free surface, and no one will be more than a 5-minute walk away from key amenities. Meanwhile, corridors for utilities and high-speed trains will be concealed underground, along with infrastructure for cargo transport. NEOM and its related projects are supposed to be cities that are totally free from streets and vehicles. Only renewable energy sources and the health and well-being of people will take priority over transportation and infrastructure, so in the Long City, they plan to launch a train that'll go through it all in 20 minutes. But where do you put all the other stuff you need to live, you might ask? What about public parks, schools, pedestrian zones, and workplaces? The creators of the line have an answer. Everything will be stacked vertically. On one floor, there's a park, a school above it, some offices above that, and down below, there's a train station or a canal. It's a matter of luck. The city's supposed to have 3 layers, one on the surface for pedestrians, one underground for infrastructure, and another also underground for transport. I'm curious about swimming channels and what people should do if they can't swim. Can they use a boat, or would that count as transport and they wouldn't be allowed in the water? Sadly, no one can give us an answer. But as I already said, artificial intelligence should be keeping an eye on the city, using different action models, building forecasts, basically doing everything to make urban life better. The designers of the city of the future even cite an example of this kind of care. A person wakes up, the house checks their metabolism, and if they had too much sugar the night before, the fridge offers them oatmeal instead of a candy bar or granola. Then they swim to work. So the city's 650 feet wide, over 105 miles long, and 1,640 feet tall. And it's watching your diet. Sounds like the plot of a weird dystopia, right? And how about the fact that the outer part of the city will be covered in a mirrored facade, giving it a unique character and allowing it to blend in with nature? Can you imagine how thrilled nature will be? And what's even more interesting, how much is all this going to cost? The estimated cost of building the line is between $100 billion and $200 billion, but some estimates say it could reach up to $1 trillion. The NEOM project, which encompasses the Line City and related resort and urban initiatives in the area, has a projected cost of $1.5 trillion. These enormous figures reflect not just the innovative ideas behind the project, but also the talented people involved in its execution. The biggest and most serious architectural firms in the world were involved in the project, along with a bunch of very well-known specialists, including Hollywood designers. But we'll get back to them later. In 2022, they said that the first phase of the project, which will last until 2030, would cost $300 billion, with about half that amount being covered by the State Investment Fund. The rest of the money is being sought from other sovereign wealth funds in the region, private investors in Saudi Arabia and abroad, because the amount is just incredible, especially for the initial phase. Just to give you an idea, the most expensive building in the world is the Great Mosque of Mecca, located in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. The total cost of construction, or rather the renovation and expansion of this mosque, amounted to $100 billion. Due to inflation, this amount was adjusted to $115.2 billion in 2022, although there are also reports of $120 billion in 2021. But in general, it's still much less than the cost of the projects we're talking about. Coming in second in terms of cost with a massive gap is Abraj Al Bait, a complex of tall buildings also constructed in Mecca. In 2012, it cost $16 billion, and in 2021, building it would have set you back $18.9 billion. Just wrap your mind around the fact that even the reconstruction and expansion of the most important mosque in the world cost at least half as much as the Long City. And if its price goes up from $200 billion to $1 trillion, then it'll be 10 times more expensive. A question comes up. Who needs all this and for what? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. The NEOM project that was announced in 2017 is a plan by Prince Mohammed, who I've mentioned before, and that's about it. Basically, no further explanations are needed. Well, okay, this plan is actually quite intriguing, turning a desert the size of Belgium into a high-tech region with a linear megacity, a ski resort, and industry, and to have all this partially floating on water too? The prince called it a test bed for new technologies that could revolutionize urban living, as well as a way to attract foreign investments. Plus, it'd help change the entire economy of Saudi Arabia, which is currently dependent on oil. When asked by reporters why he wants to build NEOM, the prince replied that his plan to revamp Saudi Arabia involves increasing its population from the current 34 million to 50 to 60 million by 2030. Half of the population will be made up of foreigners, and since the capital, Riyadh, will be totally overcrowded with that many people, that's where the city of the future comes in. Besides this, the NEOM project will create around 460,000 jobs and add about $48 billion to the country's GDP. It all sounds really promising, but there are so many questions to the project that it's hard to even know where to start. So, a city with a population density 5 times higher than Manila, mirror walls as tall as skyscrapers and endless highways, a megacity the width of a regular city block. I'm not an expert, but it seems you don't need a PhD in architecture to find such plans a bit, let's say, confusing? And indeed, many say that the city construction project is so ambitious that it borders on fantasy. Let's just take a look at what the future construction site looks like right now. So the chosen spot in the far northwest of Saudi Arabia stretches from the sun-baked shores of the Red Sea to the Rocky Mountain wastelands. In the summer, temperatures here exceed 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's practically no fresh water around. Building a city here is really pure fantasy. Remember I mentioned Hollywood designers? So the Prince commissioned work from Oliver Prawn, the designer who helped create the look for the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and Nathan Crowley, known for his work on the Dark Knight trilogy. The company also hired Jeff Julian, a futurist who worked on World War Z and I Am Legend. Basically, if it seems to you that the city will look like a set from some movie about the distant future, you're not mistaken. But the issue is that there's a big difference between the aesthetics that designers create in movies and the reality, which is a large-scale urban planning. You know, it's like very pretty and bright apartments with hardly any furniture that aren't meant for living at all, just on a city scale. For instance, one of the images made by designers shows a picnic on a ledge that's 650 feet high. Nice, sure, but dangerous for life. Proposed innovations like flying taxis and robot maids also raise eyebrows. I mean, looks good in, in The Fifth Element because that's fictional, but here we're dealing with reality. And in this reality, people who protested against the construction of cities of the future were just executed. I'm serious, this happened to several members of the WATOP tribe, on whose lands they plan to carry out the work. Attempts to relocate the indigenous people of the area for NEOM, who had lived there for generations, were tumultuous and once escalated into a shootout. A local man who didn't want to sign the relocation document and openly opposed it was killed, and 2 officers were injured. The government claimed it was self-defense, saying the man refused to surrender. Meanwhile, the WATOP are a historically nomadic tribe that is now settled in the region where Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt meet. From the very beginning, there was no place for them in the plans for NEOM, and in early 2020, thousands were informed that the government would be taking their land. No one asked for their opinion, the authorities simply presented it as a done deal. However, the man's death did matter. Officials expanded the compensation packages for displaced residents, promising them land elsewhere in the region. And then the authorities just cut off the electricity and closed schools, leaving people with no choice but to accept their situation. In October 2022, 3 men from the WATOP tribe were sentenced to death when they refused to leave their village. One of them was the brother of a man who was killed earlier in a shootout with authorities. Other tribe members received hefty prison sentences. Here's my point. The mood around the construction of the city of the future isn't very pleasant. And then the construction itself went off the rails. A few months after the announcement of the city of the future, satellite images showed that several large buildings were already going up, surrounded by green areas that sharply contrasted with the desert. But then something happened. In April 2024, it became known that at least one contractor started laying off workers. Citing anonymous sources, every serious and respected media outlet has reported on this cut, but the Saudi Arabian Minister of Economy denied the claims that the kingdom is rolling back some of its plans for the NEOM project. All projects are moving full steam ahead, he said. We set out to do something unprecedented, and we're doing something unprecedented, and we will deliver something that's unprecedented. And it's not really clear who to believe. Anonymous sources can easily lie for any reason, even just to see how serious and respected media outlets will fall for their fabrications. But the government can deny everything just to save face and maintain the appearance of success in pulling off the coolest project on Earth. In any case, even if everyone is lying, the project's problems aren't going anywhere. They're there, and there are so many of them that the city of the future could collapse before it even sees the light of day. The most distinct warning sign regarding the line came when the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the Kingdom delayed approving NEOM's budget for 2024. And it's hard to believe they just forgot or got sidetracked. This shows that the financial realities of trillions of dollars in investments are starting to raise concerns at the highest levels of the Saudi Arabian government. Even though it's the Crown Prince's idea, it seems that you're not supposed to openly disagree with him. And although NEOM has rolled out marketing and investment roadshows, the company has not yet made serious progress in attracting capital. The prince's attempt to draw in foreign investments totaling $100 billion also fell flat. It looks like at some point, Saudi Arabia figured out that its financing needs would mainly be backed by local capital and only partly by foreign cash. Construction began to slow down. The overall appeal of the project to investors was also affected by the death of Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist who actively criticized Saudi Arabia. One day he walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never came out. The journalist was killed. There are different theories of who did this and why, but I won't go into the details. The important thing is that the outrage that followed cast a shadow over foreign investments in Saudi Arabia, and many businessmen severed ties with the kingdom and the city of the future. Throw in the situation in the oil market, and it turns out that even Saudi Arabia is just running low on cash. But that's only one of the issues. Based on what over 25 current and former employees say, the project faced a lot of setbacks, many linked to the challenges of implementing the prince's grand, constantly changing ideas. At times, the prince even had to be told that his requests couldn't be met. Have you ever worked under someone with a fiery temper who doesn't know what they want, but wants it right now, and has no interest in the fact that it's just completely unrealistic? Add to this situation really big money and a country where the death penalty is legal. Not many people are willing to officially talk about the problems of the project, citing non-disclosure agreements or fear of retaliation. I can't say this fear is unfounded. At least one former employee who criticized the project was imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. Fortunately, he's since been released, but the fact still stands. They're trying to make the project happen, but it's so chaotic and inconsistent that there are serious doubts about whether it'll be finished. Here's one example, a concept called Silver Beach. Instead of plain sand, the shore will be covered with crushed marble that'll sparkle in the sun like silver. What, you might ask? The prince's idea, I'll say. To develop a plan that would bring the idea of a shimmering beach to life, NEOM employees and consultants worked overtime for several weeks. The project also included a yacht club, an electric car racing track, and more than 400 mansions, some of which were up to 100,000 square feet. In short, a grand idea. Then, in the first quarter of 2019, the project was unexpectedly postponed because the concept, even with its shiny marble sand, just wasn't unique enough for the NEOM leadership. Another similar initiative is a solar power plant worth $200 billion, which was canceled shortly after it was announced. Here's how one of the former employees describes his experience in building NEOM. If I had to put a bottom line for all the work that I did in this era, it was PowerPoint presentations that went into the garbage the next week. It was the least productive part of my whole life in terms of doing real things, and the most productive in terms of the money I got. And the work could seriously be phenomenally profitable. To help create NEOM, they offered tax-free salaries from $700,000 to $900,000 for some top-level employees. That's over 20 times the average Saudi's income. And on top of that, a bunch of benefits. Great working conditions were set up for people, featuring temporary yet cozy, though basic, apartments built in the desert, with an army of workers handling food, cleaning, and laundry. When the pandemic hit, His Highness wasn't keen on remote work, so in 2020 the government ordered charter flights from London to bring the creators of NEOM to Saudi Arabia. Imagine how much chaos is going on in the company and how uncomfortable it must be to work there if some people are leaving in under 6 months despite what looked like great conditions. But that's not the whole story. The building of cities of the future ended up having some surprising ecological consequences. This is what the mountains look like that they want to turn into a ski resort. They don't really look that ski resortish. However, the idea of building something like this in the desert is a little less absurd than it might seem at first glance. Sometimes the temperature here does drop below freezing on the highest peaks of the mountains. And if you bring enough equipment to make snow, you could set up a winter ski season. However, the people working on the project were so disturbed by the ecological consequences that they preferred to quit. Apparently, that's more effective than trying to argue with the prince. Besides other things, the resort plans included building an artificial lake, which would require blasting large parts of the landscape. This is what the project participants are saying. I quote, "We couldn't even estimate the build cost. We were hanging buildings on the side of cliffs, and we didn't even know the geology." In short, things didn't work out with the ski resort either. But the technologies for creating it at least exist. There were tons of other projects in the plan that humanity just hasn't come up with yet. Many of the key plans, especially in the fields of energy and transportation, were based on technologies that didn't even exist in prototype form. But they were in movies, TV shows, books, and video games. In the end, it appears that the multitude of problems overshadows the prince's aspirations. While it's possible that some elements of the project may be realized in the future, for now, reality wins. You owe me something. See you later.